this introspection helps you understand your emotional patterns, because we all have emotions in business and at home and anywhere, just by being humans. But we haven't learned the language of our emotions. Most people, I mean, think about, if your parents not really emotionally aware or mature, then they didn't transfer that to you. If, going to school, that's really not a subject that they teach you. At university, if you're lucky, maybe you'll meet me and I talk about it, but obviously I'm only one person. If maybe you go to then work in a company, maybe if you're lucky, you get some trainings about, but it's really, usually you only deal with that kind of language if you have a big problem, if you have a breakdown and you go see a shrink, and at some point you unpack all of this. But you are feeling all of these emotions throughout without being ill, without having a big crisis. You are every day kind of all of that, but you don't have the language for it. So most people, and that's what I hear in companies when I do trainings, they kind of want to get rid of it. Like, oh no, because it's kind of a hindrance to my performance. Because if I start feeling a bit angry or something, then maybe I get agitated and then I can't control myself, and then I can't be as efficient, and I can't do this, I can't do that. And so emotions are bad. And that's what I hear. And people, want to get rid of it. It's like they want to get rid of part of themselves. And I think that's how I started talking about emotions when I did the TED Talk, was really about bringing awareness to say, hey, guys, whether you go to work, you are still a human being. And it's not because you're in an office and you have to perform and you have, to kind of be in this collective and contribute and all that. It doesn't stop you from being human, and they shouldn't stop you from being human, So companies, in a way, maybe encourage you to not have emotion and to control, because the company is like it's not a real entity, it's not a human entity, it's like a thing of its own. And if it had a mind, it just want you to be robots and perform and make money and in, out, and all of that. But when you work in an organization, you are still a human being, so life will trigger you. And that's what I teach in organization. And I'm always surprised to teach something that is so natural, because we all have it. It's called the mechanics of emotions. And it's very simple, because I've simplified, obviously, some very complex inner workings that we have in our bodies when we are triggered with emotions, with what happens in your brain and what happens in your chemistry in your body. But I've made it simple so that people will actually get the point. And get the point that you will be confronted by life all the time. Life is a source of stimuli. And you talked about trigger. But we're not triggered by life. We are stimulated. And we trigger ourselves. And when I say that, people are like, But because it is your own frame of mind, your own belief system, your own value system that transform this stimulus into a trigger. Because that in the same situation with the same stimulus, many people will not be triggered. So it's not the fault of the stimulus, it's more how you internalize that stimulus, what it means to you with your value system. And for you, being professional is turning up on time. So when someone is not on time, it's not professional. And there's this level of expectation of being demanding, but also because to you, professionalism is very important. And, so again, so it's you who is triggered. You are triggering yourself. It's not the person being late. They're just being late. But you are triggering yourself this emotion. So it can be anger, it can be all sorts of emotion, depending on who you are. And that's very important. And I think from when I share this in organization, I help people empower themselves with their own emotional processes, rather than feeling emotions are happening to them and they are victim of that and they'll just want to get rid of it. If you feel empowered and you know your emotions are triggered by you, then it starts kind of, oh, how can I navigate it? What can I do with it? And how is it working? You kind of want to, put your hands in the motor and kind of look inside and kind of go, okay, how can I tinker, with that? So I'm talking to the engineer mind here. So yeah, you are triggering your own emotion. And the introspection, if I connect back to that, is helping you already kind of identify, oh, there are certain stimulus that to me become trigger. And maybe they trigger certain specific emotions because in my value system, professionalism is important, or truth is important, or whatever value you're holding. I'm not judging here. There's no good or bad values. Everyone's got their own. But it's important to understand that it's not because this is important, everybody should be professional. No, for you it's important. Own it, fine. But, don't expect that it's happening for everyone. Anyway, so this is triggering, you are triggering your own emotion. And the second thing that's important in here is to understand what is an emotion. And an emotion is just chemistry. It's really this chemical imbalance happening in your body because you have triggered it in some way. Okay, and I won't make the technical distinction between when it's triggered by your, kind of more primal brain or when it's triggered by your more thinking brain, because then it'll be too long. But you are triggering it in some way, and it's changing you. And I love to see emotion. Your emotion is the language of your body. It's your heart might be beating faster. Your breathing changes. Your blood flow changes. Your body's changed. You are changed. And then people think, but why? Why do we need to be in that state, of excitation or, kind of really feeling hot and, angry and all of this? Why do we have that? And it's a very primal processes, and it's still there. So maybe it's still useful. And that's the second shift that happens when I train about emotion, is that understanding the purpose of these emotions, why they are there, why they are changing our body in that instant, in that moment when we are triggered by something specific. So here, it's really about this. It's a very simple way to get a very basic first understanding of the emotion I'm feeling. And I think this is really helping people start decoding themselves and thinking, well, when I feel anger, what's happening really? Okay, where does it come from? It comes from maybe an evaluation. So in my value system, I've been triggered and I believe this is unfair, this is unjust, this shouldn't be there. It's an obstacle to my desire. I deserve it. I shouldn't be, the should and all of that. You hear that. That's the evaluation you have in your mind. And that's the trigger. Yeah. Thinking these thoughts is triggering the emotion. So I'm triggering anger. And anger, if most people feel hot when they're angry, the energy is rising. Maybe the hands want to move up. The throat, expands. We might speak louder. There's this kind of really powerful thing going upwards, like a volcano wants to explode. Yeah. Well, some people have learned to kind of put a lid on the volcano, and it's like a cocotte minutin, like the fresh cooker. But initially, it's more like a volcano. And you think, well, why do we have that? What's the point of feeling like a volcano? Because it's very dangerous, a volcano. It's very destructive and all of that. And people, say really mean things, and maybe they physically hit people. And so really, why do we want anger, to be part of our emotional life? And actually, you need to understand that anger gives you power, perseverance, motivation to act. And if you want to change the injustice, to overcome the obstacle, to kind of, remember this anger comes from this trigger, that there's something that is wrong here. Well, anger is giving you all that energy, and physically, mentally, kind of gives you all of that to be able to deal with that situation, to push back, to get people on board, to create a big leadership speech that will get all of these followers who will help you change the world. That's what anger is when it's rightly channeled, when you manage to harness the power of that volcano, then it transforms into superb action, passionate movements. This is all I can say. And for me, it was the emotion I had the most trouble with for a long time, because especially for women, I say that for women because I do teach a lot of women about that. And I know that anger is not an emotion that we have been taught to express, because it's very masculine, it's very powerful and strong. So it hasn't been, let's say, encouraged in girls, unfortunately. So we haven't trained or known how to express it in a useful way. But if you understand that this emotion is not bad, it's not aggression, the behavior might be aggressive, violent, but the emotion itself can be very useful if rightly channeled into a behavior that is constructive. So if your anger about this late person at a meeting, if you manage to, in a very poised, grounded way, to communicate that, it is important for you to be professional, that respecting each other's time is a strong value, and then you really kind of be with that, people will understand. And because if you don't channel it, they might either you implode because you don't say anything, but kind of imploding on the inside, or it might be a burst out of oh, you're always late, kind of or some passive aggressive comments, or any way unproductive, let's say, that this anger might come out.